A millionaire gave his unlimited credit card to a beggar. Hours later, he broke down in tears after seeing the spending notifications. Alfonso Garcia stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse suite, gazing out at the picturesque skyline of San Miguel de Allende. The setting sun painted the colonial architecture in hues of gold and orange, a sight that would take most people's breath away. But for Alfonso, it was just another day in paradise, a paradise that felt increasingly hollow. At 45, Alfonso had achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of, at least on paper. He was the owner of a thriving hotel chain that spanned across Mexico and was rapidly expanding internationally. His name was synonymous with luxury and success. Yet as he stood there in his tailored suit, a glass of aged whiskey in hand, he felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The penthouse around him was a testament to his wealth. Priceless artwork adorned the walls, custom-made furniture filled the rooms, and state-of-the-art technology controlled every aspect of his living space, but none of it brought him joy anymore. Alfonso sighed, setting down his untouched drink. He loosened his tie, feeling suddenly suffocated by the trappings of his success. Without really thinking about it, he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. His security team, ever present, stirred as he emerged from his private elevator. "Sir?" His head of security, Javier, questioned, eyebrow raised. "I'm going for a walk," Alfonso said, his tone brooking no argument. "Alone." Javier looked concerned, but knew better than to protest. "Of course, sir, but please take this," he said, handing Alfonso a sleek, discreet panic button, just in case. Alfonso nodded, pocketing the device more to appease Javier than out of any real concern for his safety. He strode through the lobby of his flagship hotel, ignoring the deferential nods and wide-eyed stares of his employees and guests. As he stepped out onto the cobblestone streets of San Miguel de Allende, Alfonso felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The warm evening air caressed his face, carrying with it the sense of street food and blooming bougainvillea. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to blend into the crowd, just another face among the tourists and locals enjoying the evening. Alfonso wandered aimlessly, drinking in the sights and sounds of the city he'd lived in for years, but rarely truly experienced. He passed by bustling markets, their vendors calling out their wares in melodious Spanish. Street musicians played lively tunes, their music mixing with the laughter of children playing in the squares. As he turned down a quieter side street, Alfonso's gaze fell upon a figure huddled in a doorway. It was a woman, probably in her early 40s, though life had clearly been hard on her. Her clothes were worn but clean, and there was a quiet dignity in the way she sat, despite her circumstances. Alfonso found himself slowing, then stopping altogether. There was something about this woman that caught his attention, something that spoke to the emptiness he'd been feeling. Without really knowing why, he approached her. The woman looked up as he neared, and Alfonso was struck by the depth of her dark eyes. They held a wisdom and strength that belied her apparent situation. "Buenas noches," Alfonso said softly, crouching down to her level. "I'm Alfonso. What's your name?" The woman regarded him warily for a moment before responding. "Camila," she said, her voice surprisingly melodious. "Camila," Alfonso repeated, tasting the name. "I hope you don't think me too forward, but I'd like to help you if I may." Camila's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't need charity, senor." Alfonso shook his head. "It's not charity. It's—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It's an experiment, a chance for both of us, perhaps." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his platinum credit card. "This card has no limit. I want you to take it, use it for the next 24 hours, however you see fit. Tomorrow evening, meet me at the gazebo in the Jardín Principal, and we'll talk about how you used it." Camila's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't be serious." Alfonso smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in years. "I've never been more serious in my life. Please, Camila, take it." With a trembling hand, Camila reached out and took the card. As their fingers brushed, Alfonso felt a jolt of something. Connection. Hope. He wasn't sure, but for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. As he walked away, leaving a stunned Camila behind, Alfonso felt a sense of anticipation building in his chest. He didn't know what would come of this impulsive act, but he knew that somehow his life was about to change. Little did he know just how profound that change would be. The sun had barely risen over San Miguel de Allende when Camila stirred from her fitful sleep. For a moment, she thought the events of the previous night had been a dream. The encounter with the well-dressed stranger, the platinum card burning a hole in her pocket. But as she reached into her worn jacket, her fingers brushed against the cool metal, and she knew it had been real. Camilla's mind raced with possibilities. She had 24 hours with unlimited funds. What would she do? The temptation to indulge, to finally experience the luxuries she'd been denied for so long, was strong. But as she looked around at the familiar faces of her homeless community, a different path crystallized in her mind. With determination in her step, Camilla set out into the awakening city. Her first stop was the local pharmacy, where she purchased medications for elderly Don Pedro, who couldn't afford his heart pills, and little Maria, whose asthma often left her gasping for breath. Next, she visited the market, filling bags with fresh fruits, vegetables, and staples. These she distributed among the hungry families she'd come to know over the years. The gratitude in their eyes brought tears to her own. But she wasn't finished yet. Camilla made her way to a clothing store, purchasing warm coats, sturdy shoes, and clean clothes for those who needed them most. She arranged for them to be delivered to the local shelter, knowing they would be distributed fairly. As the day wore on, Camilla's actions began to draw attention. People whispered about the mysterious woman on a mission of mercy. Some even tried to follow her, curious about the source of her sudden generosity. But Camilla remained focused on her task, ignoring the growing murmurs around her. In the afternoon, she visited several community kitchens, making large donations to ensure they could continue feeding the city's most vulnerable for months to come. The organizers were stunned by her generosity, but Camilla simply smiled and moved on to her next task. As the sun began to set, Camilla found herself in a quiet bank branch. Here she made perhaps her most significant transaction of the day. She set up a trust fund for her daughter Daniela, ensuring that no matter what happened, her child would have a chance at the education and opportunities Camilla had been denied. Throughout the day, Camilla had been so focused on helping others that she'd barely spared a thought for herself. But as she left the bank, she realized she had one last stop to make. In a small out-of-the-way shop, Camilla purchased a simple but elegant dress and a pair of comfortable shoes. She couldn't meet Alfonso looking like a beggar, not after all she'd done with his gift. As night fell, Camilla made her way to a modest pension, where she rented a room for the night. She showered, washing away years of hardship, if only temporarily. As she donned her new clothes and looked at herself in the mirror, Camilla hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. But it wasn't the new clothes or the clean hair that had transformed her. It was the look in her eyes, a mixture of pride, hope, and a quiet strength that had always been there but now shone brightly. Meanwhile, across the city, Alfonso paced in his penthouse, anxiety and anticipation warring within him. He'd spent the day distracted, unable to focus on work, his mind constantly wandering to Camilla and wondering what she was doing with his card. As the hour of their meeting approached, Alfonso found himself filled with a nervous energy he hadn't felt in years. He changed his outfit several times, unsure of what to wear to meet a woman he'd encountered as a beggar, but who now held the power to surprise him. Finally, unable to wait any longer, Alfonso headed out, making his way to the Jardin Principal. As he approached the gazebo, his heart pounding, he saw a figure already waiting there. It took him a moment to recognize Camilla. Gone was the disheveled woman from the night before. In her place stood a woman transformed, not by luxury or extravagance, but by dignity and purpose. Their eyes met, and in that moment, both Alfonso and Camilla knew that their lives would never be the same again. The Jardin Principal was alive with the sounds of a typical San Miguel evening. Mariachi music, drifting from nearby restaurants, the laughter of children chasing each other around the square, the gentle murmur of conversations in a mix of Spanish and English. But for Alfonso and Camilla, standing face to face in the ornate gazebo, the rest of the world faded away. Alfonso's breath caught in his throat as he took in Camilla's transformation. She stood tall and confident, her simple dress accentuating a grace he hadn't noticed before. But it was her eyes that truly captivated him. They shone with a mixture of gratitude, wisdom, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Camilla," he breathed. "You look different," she supplied with a small smile. "Amazing what a shower and clean clothes can do." Alfonso shook his head, finding his voice. "No, not just different. You look like yourself, the real you." Camilla's smile widened slightly, but there was a seriousness in her eyes. "Thank you, Alfonso, for this opportunity, for your trust. I hope I've used it well." "Tell me," Alfonso said eagerly, gesturing for them to sit on a bench within the gazebo. "How did you spend the day?" As Camilla recounted her acts of generosity, the medicines purchased, the hungry fed, the cold clothed, Alfonso found himself more and more in awe. He had given her the chance to indulge in anything she wanted, and she had chosen to help others at every turn. But why? He couldn't help but ask when she finished. You could have bought yourself a house, a car, anything you wanted. Why choose to give it all away? Camilla was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting out over the bustling square. "Because I know what it's like to have nothing," she said softly. "To wonder where your next meal will come from, to shiver through cold nights. But I also know the power of kindness, of a helping hand when you least expect it." She turned back to Alfonso, her eyes intense. "You gave me that chance, Alfonso. How could I not pass it on?" Alfonso felt a lump form in his throat. In all his years of wealth and success, he had never encountered such selflessness. "You're an extraordinary woman, Camilla," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Camilla smiled sadly. "I'm just someone who's seen both sides of life. Which reminds me." She reached into her purse and pulled out the platinum card, holding it out to Alfonso. "I believe this belongs to you." As Alfonso took the card, their fingers brushed, and he felt that same jolt of connection he'd experienced the night before. On impulse, he caught her hand in his. "Camilla, I'd like to help you. Not just for a day, but permanently. Let me give you a job, a place to live. Someone like you shouldn't be on the streets." Camilla's eyes widened in surprise, but then a shadow passed over her face. She gently withdrew her hand. "That's very kind of you, Alfonso, but there's something you need to know, something I've been carrying for a long time." Alfonso leaned in, sensing the weight of her words. "What is it, Camilla? You can tell me anything." Camilla took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Alfonso, we've met before, many years ago." Alfonso frowned, searching his memory. "I'm sorry, I don't—" "It was at a charity gala," Camilla continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was working as a server. We talked, we laughed, you asked me to dance." As she spoke, fragmented memories began to surface in Alfonso's mind. A crowded ballroom, a beautiful young woman in a server's uniform, stolen moments in a moonlit garden. "We fell in love," Camilla said, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "It was fast, intense. But then, my mother," Alfonso breathed, the full memory crashing over him like a wave. "She found out. He trailed off, the pain of that long-buried heartbreak fresh once again. Camilla nodded, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "She threatened me, told me I would ruin your life. I was young, scared, I ran." Alfonso felt as if the ground was shifting beneath him. "Camilla, I looked for you, for months, years even." Why?" Camilla took another deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Because I was pregnant, Alfonso, with your child." The world seemed to stop. Alfonso stared at Camilla, unable to process her words. "Pregnant," he finally managed to choke out. We have a child." Camilla nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "A daughter. Daniela. She's 16 now." Alfonso's mind reeled. A daughter, he had a daughter. A child he'd never known, never held, never watched grow up. Anger, grief, and a desperate longing warred within him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice harsh with emotion. "All these years, Camilla. All these years, and I was afraid," Camilla admitted, her voice small. "Your mother's threats. I believed her when she said she would destroy us both. I thought I was protecting Daniela. And you." Alfonso stood abruptly, needing to move, to process. He paced the small confines of the gazebo, running his hands through his hair. "Where is she?" he asked suddenly, turning back to Camilla. "Where's Daniela?" Camilla's eyes filled with fresh tears. I gave her up for adoption," she whispered. "To give her her best chance. A couple, Maria and Luis, they've raised her. She's had a good life, Alfonso, better than I could have given her." Alfonso felt as if he'd been punched in the gut, his daughter out there in the world, not knowing who she really was. "Not knowing him. I want to meet her," he said, his voice thick with determination. "I need to meet her, Camilla. She's my daughter. Our daughter." Camilla stood, reaching out to touch Alfonso's arm gently. "It's not that simple, Alfonso. She doesn't know about us, about her adoption. It would be a shock in—" "I don't care," Alfonso interrupted, though he immediately regretted his harsh tone. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "I'm sorry, I've missed so much." "I can't miss any more." Camilla nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "We'll find a way," she promised. "Together, if that's what you want." Alfonso looked at Camilla, really looked at her. Beyond the years of hardship, he could see the young woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who'd borne his child in secret, who'd sacrificed everything to give that child a better life. In that moment, standing in a gazebo in the heart of San Miguel de Allende, Alfonso Garcia's world shifted on its axis. The revelation in the gazebo had left both Alfonso and Camilla reeling. As they walked together through the lamplit streets of San Miguel de Allende, an uncomfortable silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words and years of lost time. Alfonso's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, joy at the discovery of his daughter's existence, anger at the years of separation, and a deep, aching sadness for all the moments he had missed. He glanced at Camilla, noting the worry lines etched on her face, and felt a pang of guilt for his initial harsh reaction. "I'm sorry," he said softly, breaking the silence. "I shouldn't have lashed out at you like that. It's a lot to process." Camilla nodded, her eyes fixed on the cobblestone path ahead. "I understand, Alfonso. I've had years to come to terms with my decisions, but for you it's all new. I don't blame you for being upset." They reached a small plaza and sat on a wrought iron bench beneath a blooming jacaranda tree. The sweet scent of the flowers mingled with the distant aroma of street food, creating a surreal backdrop for their heavy conversation. "Tell me about her," Alfonso said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me about Daniela." A soft smile touched Camilla's lips, her eyes taking on a faraway look. "She's beautiful, Alfonso. So smart and kind. She has your eyes, you know. And your determination." As Camilla spoke, painting a picture of the daughter he'd never known, Alfonso felt his heart swell with a love he'd never experienced before. He learned that Daniela was passionate about science, particularly genetics, that she volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends, that she had a laugh that could light up a room. "She sounds amazing," Alfonso said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to meet her, Camilla. I need to." Camilla's smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Alfonso, we need to be careful. Daniela doesn't know she's adopted. Maria and Luis, they've been wonderful parents to her. We can't just barge into her life and turn everything upside down." Alfonso nodded reluctantly, understanding the wisdom in Camilla's words, even as every fiber of his being screamed to rush to his daughter. "So what do we do?" "We take it slow," Camilla said. "We find a way to introduce you into her life gradually. Maybe you could sponsor a scholarship at her school. It would give you a reason to meet her without raising suspicions." As they discussed potential plans, neither noticed the figure lurking in the shadows of a nearby alley. Gloria Garcia, Alfonso's mother, had been alerted by her extensive network of spies about her son's strange behavior. She had followed him to the gazebo and had overheard every word of his conversation with Camilla. Gloria's face was a mask of cold fury as she watched her son and the woman she had driven away years ago. This would not do. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to build the Garcia empire. She would not let some long-lost love child threaten everything now. With a decisive nod, Gloria slipped away into the night, her mind already formulating plans to keep Alfonso and Camilla apart, and to ensure that Daniela never learned the truth about her parentage. Meanwhile, across town, Daniela sat at her desk poring over genetics textbooks. She pushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear, revealing eyes that were indeed startlingly similar to Alfonso's. As she studied, she felt a strange shiver run down her spine, as if somewhere, somehow, her life was about to change dramatically. Maria, Daniela's adoptive mother, watched her from the doorway with a mixture of love and worry. She had always known this day might come, the day when the past would catch up with them. She and Luis had promised to love and protect Daniela as their own, but they had also promised to tell her the truth when the time was right. Watching her daughter now, Maria wondered if that time was approaching faster than any of them were prepared for. Back in the plaza, Alfonso and Camila had come to an agreement. They would proceed cautiously, with Alfonso finding a way to enter Daniela's life as a mentor figure. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. As they stood to part ways, Alfonso caught Camila's hand. "I want to help you too," he said earnestly. "You don't have to live on the streets anymore. Let me—" Camila gently withdrew her hand. "Alfonso, I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept. Not now. There's too much at stake, too much history between us. Let's focus on Daniela for now." Alfonso nodded reluctantly, understanding but not liking it. As he watched Camila walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the city he thought he knew so well, he felt a resolve harden within him. He would make this right. He would get to know his daughter, and he would find a way to help Camila, whether she wanted it or not. What Alfonso didn't realize was that his actions had set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of his world. As he made his way back to his penthouse, his mind filled with dreams of the future, the shadows of the past were already moving to darken his path. In her luxurious hacienda on the outskirts of town, Gloria Garcia picked up her phone and dialed a number she had hoped never to use again. "It's me," she said when the line connected. "We have a problem. It's time to call in that favor you owe me." As the night deepened over San Miguel de Allende, the stage was set for a drama that would test the bonds of family, the power of love, and the strength of the human spirit. For Alfonso, Camila, and Daniela, life as they knew it was about to change forever. The following week saw a flurry of activity in San Miguel de Allende, with Alfonso at the center of it all. True to his word, he had established a generous scholarship program at Daniela's school, focusing on students interested in pursuing genetics and biotechnology. It was a calculated move, one that would allow him to meet his daughter under the guise of a benevolent benefactor. On the day of the scholarship announcement, Alfonso stood before a crowd of eager students and proud parents, his eyes scanning the sea of faces for the one that would match the description Camila had given him. And then, suddenly, there she was. Daniela stood near the front of the crowd, her dark eyes wide with excitement. Alfonso's breath caught in his throat as he saw, for the first time, the perfect blend of his and Camila's features in their daughter's face. It took every ounce of his self-control not to rush down from the podium and embrace her. Instead, he finished his speech, announcing the recipients of the scholarship. Daniela's name was among them, of course. As the crowd erupted in applause, Alfonso saw her jump with joy, hugging her friends and then turning to embrace a couple he assumed must be Maria and Luis, her adoptive parents. After the ceremony, Alfonso made his way through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting thanks. Finally, he reached Daniela and her family. "Congratulations, Ms. Hernandez," he said, extending his hand to Daniela. "Your essay on the future of genetic engineering was truly impressive." Daniela beamed, shaking his hand enthusiastically. "Thank you so much, Mr. Garcia. This opportunity means everything to me." As they spoke, Alfonso felt a connection he had never experienced before. This was his daughter, his flesh and blood, and yet she had no idea who he really was. The weight of the secret pressed heavily on him. Maria and Luis watched the interaction with a mixture of pride and unease. They had known this day might come, but facing it was another matter entirely. Luis stepped forward, extending his hand to Alfonso. "Mr. Garcia, we can't thank you enough for this opportunity you've given Daniela," he said, his voice warm, but with an undercurrent of protectiveness. Alfonso shook Luis's hand, feeling a twinge of jealousy for this man who had raised his daughter. "It's my pleasure," he replied. "I have a feeling Daniela will do great things in the field of genetics." As they chatted, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of a nearby building. Camilla couldn't resist the temptation to see her daughter on this important day. Her heart swelled with pride at Daniela's accomplishment, but it also ached with the pain of separation. Across town, in her opulent hacienda, Gloria Garcia was also focused on the scholarship ceremony, but for very different reasons. She watched a live stream of the event on her tablet, her eyes narrowing as she saw Alfonso interact with Daniela. "This won't do at all," she muttered, reaching for her phone. She dialed a number, and when the call connected, she spoke without preamble. "It's time to move forward with our plan. Alfonso is getting too close." The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Lucia, Camilla's estranged sister. "Are you sure about this, Doña Gloria? Once we set this in motion, there's no going back." Gloria's voice was cold and determined. "I'm sure. Remember our agreement, Lucia. You play your part and you'll be well compensated. Fail me and you'll regret it." As Gloria ended the call, she allowed herself a small smile. Soon she would drive a wedge between Alfonso and Camilla that no amount of lost time or rediscovered love could overcome. Meanwhile, back at the school, Alfonso was saying his goodbyes to Daniela and her family. As he walked away, he felt a mix of elation and frustration. He had met his daughter, spoken to her, even shaken her hand, but she still had no idea who he really was. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice Camilla step out of the shadows to join him. "She's amazing, isn't she?" Camilla said softly. Alfonso nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "She's perfect. Camilla, I don't know how much longer I can do this, pretending to be a stranger to my own daughter." Camilla placed a comforting hand on his arm. "I know it's hard, Alfonso, but we have to be patient for Daniela's sake." As they walked together, discussing their next steps, neither Alfonso nor Camilla realized that their carefully laid plans were about to be thrown into chaos. The threads of fate were drawing tighter, pulling together a tapestry of love, lies, and long-buried secrets that would soon be exposed to the light of day. In her bedroom, Daniela sat at her desk, her scholarship certificate proudly displayed beside her. As she opened her genetics textbook, her mind kept drifting back to Mr. Garcia. There was something about him, something familiar that she couldn't quite place. Little did she know that the answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask were closer than she could have ever imagined. As night fell over San Miguel de Allende, the city hummed with unseen tensions. In the Garcia penthouse, in Camilla's humble room, in the Hernandez family home, and in Gloria's hacienda, 5 people lay awake, each contemplating a future that was rapidly hurtling towards a collision course with the past. The stage was set for revelations that would shake the foundations of their world. And as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, fate prepared to play its hand. The weeks following the scholarship ceremony saw a subtle but significant shift in the lives of Alfonso, Camilla, and Daniela. Alfonso, under the guise of mentoring the scholarship recipients, found more opportunities to spend time with his daughter. Each interaction was a bittersweet mix of joy and frustration, the happiness of getting to know Daniela Waring, with the pain of keeping his true identity a secret. Camilla, meanwhile, had reluctantly accepted a position as a housekeeper in one of Alfonso's smaller hotels. It was a compromise they had reached after heated discussions. Alfonso insisted on helping her, while Camilla was determined to maintain her independence. The job allowed her to improve her living situation without feeling like she was accepting charity, and it provided a cover for her frequent meetings with Alfonso to discuss their daughter. Daniela, oblivious to the true nature of the changes in her life, threw herself into her studies with renewed vigor. The Garcia Scholarship had opened doors she had only dreamed of, and she was determined to make the most of the opportunity. She found herself looking forward to her meetings with Mr. Garcia, drawn to his kindness and the strange sense of familiarity she felt in his presence. But as these 3 lives began to intertwine more closely, the shadows of the past were creeping ever nearer, threatening to unravel everything. One balmy evening, as Alfonso sat in his penthouse reviewing reports, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. His blood ran cold as he read the text. "I know your secret. Meet me at the old chapel on Calle Aldama at midnight. Come alone, or Daniela learns the truth." Alfonso's mind raced. Who could have discovered the truth? Was it a bluff? He contemplated calling Camilla but decided against it. If this was a trap, he didn't want to risk her safety as well. As the clock struck midnight, Alfonso found himself standing before the weathered doors of the old chapel. With a deep breath, he pushed them open and stepped into the dimly lit interior. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come," a voice echoed from the shadows. A figure stepped into the flickering candlelight, and Alfonso gasped. "Lucia." "Camilla's sister?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. Lucia's face was a mask of bitterness and resentment. "So you remember me?" "I'm touched," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What is this about, Lucia? How do you know about Daniela?" Alfonso demanded, his patience wearing thin. Lucia circled Alfonso slowly like a predator stalking its prey. "Oh, I know all about your little secret family, Alfonso. The long-lost daughter, the rekindled romance with my dear sister. It's all very touching." Her voice hardened. "But I'm here to offer you a deal." Alfonso's eyes narrowed. "What kind of deal?" "Simple," Lucia said, a cold smile playing on her lips. "You're going to pay me to keep quiet. 1,000,000 pesos should do for now, unless you want Daniela to learn the truth about her parents in a much less gentle manner." Alfonso felt a surge of anger. "You would do that to your own niece, to your sister?" Lucia's laugh was hollow. "My sister? The one who left me behind when she ran away all those years ago? The one who's about to have a fairy tale ending while I'm left with nothing?" "No, Alfonso. I'm looking out for myself now." As Alfonso opened his mouth to respond, a gasp from the chapel entrance caught both their attention. They turned to see Camilla standing there, her face a mixture of shock and betrayal. "Lucia!" "How could you?" Camilla whispered, her voice breaking. The sisters stared at each other, years of unspoken hurt and resentment hanging in the air between them. Alfonso looked from one to the other, realizing that the situation had just become infinitely more complicated. Unbeknownst to the three adults in the chapel, a fourth person had followed Alfonso there, curious about his strange behavior. Daniela crouched outside a broken stained glass window, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of the fragments of conversation she was overhearing. Back in her hacienda, Gloria Garcia sat in her study, a glass of wine in hand as she listened to the live audio feed from the bug she had planted on Lucia. A satisfied smile played on her lips as she heard the confrontation unfold. Everything was going according to plan. As the night deepened, the old chapel on Calle Aldama became the crucible in which long-buried secrets and fresh betrayals collided. The lives of Alfonso, Camilla, Lucia, and Daniela teetered on the brink of irrevocable change. In the shadows of the chapel, amidst accusations and revelations, the fragile web of lies and half-truths that had held their lives together for so long began to unravel. And as the first light of dawn began to creep through the broken stained glass windows, illuminating the shocked and tearful faces within, it became clear that nothing would ever be the same again. The truth so long hidden was finally clawing its way into the light. But would it bring healing or destruction? Only time would tell. The morning after the confrontation in the chapel dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil roiling through the lives of those involved. Alfonso paced in his penthouse, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from a sleepless night. Camilla sat in her modest apartment, tears streaming down her face as she grappled with her sister's betrayal. And Daniela lay in her bed, her mind racing with the fragments of conversation she had overheard, trying to piece together a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Alfonso made a decision. He couldn't continue this charade any longer. It was time for the truth to come out, consequences be damned. He picked up his phone and dialed Camilla's number. "We need to tell her," he said without preamble when Camilla answered. "Today. Now, before someone else does." There was a long pause before Camilla replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You're right, it's time. But Alfonso, what about Maria and Luis? They deserve to be part of this conversation too." Alfonso agreed, and a plan was hastily made. They would meet at the Hernandez home that afternoon. It was time for all the cards to be laid on the table. As Alfonso and Camilla made their way separately to the Hernandez residence, neither was aware of the storm that was about to break. Lucia, driven by a toxic mixture of jealousy, resentment, and Gloria's manipulations, had already set a plan in motion that would shatter their carefully orchestrated revelation. Daniela sat in the living room with Maria and Luis, her adoptive parents, a tense silence hanging in the air. She had finally confided in them about what she had overheard at the chapel, and now they all waited, anxiety etched on their faces, for the arrival of Alfonso and Camila. The doorbell rang, causing everyone to jump. Luis went to answer it, returning moments later with Alfonso and Camila in tow. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken words and barely contained emotions. Alfonso cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on Daniela. "There's something we need to tell you, Daniela. Something that—" But before he could continue, the sound of screeching tires outside interrupted him. The front door burst open, and Lucia stormed in, her eyes wild with a manic energy. "Oh, good. Everyone's here," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Then let me be the one to tell the truth. Daniela, meet your real parents. Alfonso Garcia, the great hotel magnate, and my sister Camila, the saint of the streets. Surprise." The room exploded into chaos. Daniela's eyes widened in shock, darting between Alfonso, Camila, and her adoptive parents. Maria and Luis stood protectively in front of Daniela, while Alfonso moved to confront Lucia. "How dare you?" Alfonso roared. "We were going to tell her ourselves gently. You had no right." Camila, tears streaming down her face, approached Daniela slowly. "Mija, I'm so sorry. This isn't how we wanted you to find out. Please, let us explain." But Daniela, overwhelmed by the revelations and the sudden upheaval of everything she thought she knew about her life, backed away. "Stay away from me," she choked out. "All of you. I need to think." With that, she bolted from the room and out of the house. Ignoring the calls of both her biological and adoptive parents, the adults were left in a state of shock, the carefully constructed plans for revelation lying in ruins around them. As Daniela ran through the streets of San Miguel de Allende, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and hurt, she found herself drawn to the one place that had always brought her comfort, the old botanical gardens where she used to study. She collapsed on a bench, sobs racking her body as she tried to process the earth-shattering revelations. Back at the house, the situation continued to deteriorate. Accusations flew between Alfonso, Camila, and Lucia, while Maria and Luis struggled to come to terms with the fact that the secret they had guarded for so long had been exposed in the worst possible way. Unnoticed in the chaos, Lucia slipped away, a satisfied smirk on her face. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "It's done," she said when the call connected. "Everything went exactly as you planned, Doña Gloria." In her hacienda, Gloria Garcia allowed herself a moment of triumph. The first phase of her plan had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. Now it was time to move on to the next stage, driving Alfonso, Camila, and Daniela apart for good. As night fell over San Miguel de Allende, 5 shattered lives lay in emotional ruins. Alfonso and Camila, their dream of a joyful reunion with their daughter in tatters. Maria and Luis, grappling with the fear of losing the child they had raised and loved as their own. And Daniela, alone in the gathering darkness of the botanical gardens, her entire world turned upside down. The truth had finally come to light, but instead of bringing healing, it had sown chaos and heartbreak. As the stars began to twinkle in the velvet sky above, the question hung heavy in the air. Could these broken bonds ever be mended? Or had the revelation come too late at too high a cost? The stage was set for a battle of hearts, where love would be tested against hurt, trust against betrayal, and the strength of blood ties against the bonds forged by years of care and devotion. In the days to come, each of them would be forced to confront their deepest fears and make choices that would shape the rest of their lives. And somewhere in the shadows, Gloria Garcia waited, ready to capitalize on their pain and confusion to further her own agenda. The game was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The days following the explosive revelation at the Hernandez home were filled with a tense, heavy silence that seemed to blanket all of San Miguel de Allende. Daniela had not returned home, choosing instead to stay with a close friend as she grappled with the seismic shift in her understanding of her own identity. Alfonso and Camila, racked with guilt and worry, respected her need for space while frantically trying to find a way to mend the damage done. Maria and Luis, the only parents Daniela had ever known, found themselves in an impossible position. They loved Daniela fiercely and were terrified of losing her, but they also recognized the pain and longing in Alfonso and Camila's eyes, the same pain they had felt for years before Daniela came into their lives. 1 week after the revelation, an uneasy meeting was called at neutral ground, a private room in one of Alfonso's smaller hotels. Daniela had finally agreed to hear everyone out, on the condition that they would respect her decisions moving forward. As they all gathered around a large table, the tension in the room was palpable. Daniela sat between Maria and Luis, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. Across from them sat Alfonso and Camila, looking haggard and anxious. Alfonso cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Daniela, we want you to know how sorry we are for how all of this came out. We never meant to hurt you." Daniela's eyes flashed with a mixture of pain and anger. "But you did hurt me. All of you," she said, her gaze sweeping across the table. "My entire life has been a lie." "No, Mika," Maria interjected gently. "Our love for you has always been real. That's not a lie." Camila leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "Daniela, please understand. We thought we were protecting you. I was young, scared, and threatened by Alfonso's mother. I thought I was giving you your best chance at life." "And you?" Daniela turned to Alfonso. "You didn't know about me at all?" Alfonso shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "No, I didn't. If I had known, God, Daniela, I would have moved heaven and earth to be in your life." As the conversation continued, raw emotions were laid bare. Tears were shed, apologies were made, and slowly, ever so slowly, a fragile understanding began to form. Daniela listened as her biological parents explained the circumstances of her birth and adoption, and as her adoptive parents shared their side of the story. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, Daniela finally spoke. "I can't pretend that everything is okay," she said softly. "I'm angry, I'm hurt, and I'm confused, but I'm willing to try. To get to know you," she looked at Alfonso and Camila, "and to understand why you made the choices you did." A collective sigh of relief passed through the room. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As they all prepared to leave, Alfonso pulled Maria and Luis aside. "Thank you," he said earnestly, "for giving our daughter the life we couldn't. I want you to know that I don't intend to take Daniela away from you. You're her parents too, in every way that matters." Maria and Luis nodded, grateful for Alfonso's words but still wary of what the future might hold. Meanwhile, across town, Gloria Garcia was furious. She had expected her plan to drive a permanent wedge between Alfonso, Camila, and Daniela. Instead, it seemed to have brought them closer together. She realized she would need to take more drastic measures. Gloria reached for her phone, dialing a familiar number. "Lucia," she barked when the call connected. "We're moving to phase 2. It's time to bring out the big guns." Lucia, still bitter from her confrontation with Camila and feeling used by Gloria, hesitated. "I'm not sure I want to be involved anymore, Doña Gloria. This has gone too far." Gloria's voice turned icy. "Need I remind you of the consequences if you back out now? You're in this to the end, Lucia. Unless you want certain unsavory details about your past to come to light." Lucia swallowed hard, knowing she was trapped. "What do you need me to do?" she asked resignedly. As Gloria outlined her new plan, a plan that would strike at the very heart of Alfonso's empire and Camila's newfound stability, she failed to notice the figure lurking in the shadows of her study. Javier, Alfonso's loyal head of security, had long suspected Gloria's machinations and had taken it upon himself to investigate. Now, hidden behind a heavy curtain, he recorded every damning word of Gloria's scheme. Back at the hotel, as the impromptu family meeting broke up, Daniela found herself alone with Alfonso for a moment. She looked up at him, really studying his face for the first time. "I have your eyes," she said softly, a hint of wonder in her voice. Alfonso felt his heart constrict with emotion. "Yes," he managed to say. "Yes, you do." It was a small moment, but it held the promise of more to come. As Daniela left with Maria and Luis, and Camila prepared to return to her apartment, there was a sense that while the road ahead would be difficult, it was not impassable. What none of them realized was that Gloria's new plan was already in motion, a plan that would test their newfound fragile bonds to their very limits. As night fell over San Miguel de Allende, the pieces were being moved into place for a confrontation that would shake the Garcia empire to its very foundations and force each of them to decide what and who they were willing to fight for. The challenge ahead would require not just love and understanding, but courage, sacrifice, and a willingness to stand together against forces that sought to tear them apart. The question remained, were they ready for the battle to come? The weeks following the emotional family meeting saw a tentative peace settle over the newly expanded Garcia Hernandez family. Daniela, still living with Maria and Luis, had begun to cautiously open up to Alfonso and Camila. Weekly dinners became a ritual, awkward at first but gradually warming as Daniela allowed herself to get to know her biological parents. Alfonso threw himself into being there for Daniela, showing up at her school events and offering guidance on her genetics projects. Camila, with her innate warmth and understanding, slowly began to bridge the gap between mother and daughter. The sight of them laughing together over shared mannerisms brought tears to Alfonso's eyes more than once. However, beneath this veneer of growing familial harmony, storm clouds were gathering. Gloria Garcia, incensed by the failure of her initial plan, had set in motion a series of events designed to destroy everything Alfonso held dear. The first strike came on a sunny Tuesday morning. Alfonso arrived at his office to find a team of government auditors waiting for him. They presented him with a warrant to investigate allegations of tax fraud and money laundering within the Garcia hotel chain. "This is ridiculous," Alfonso sputtered, his mind racing. "Our books are clean. We have nothing to hide." But as the days wore on and the auditors dug deeper, discrepancies began to surface. Transactions that Alfonso had never authorized, offshore accounts he knew nothing about, all pointing to a massive financial fraud orchestrated over years. As news of the investigation leaked to the press, Alfonso found himself besieged by reporters and facing the very real possibility of losing everything he had built. The stress began to take its toll, dark circles forming under his eyes as he worked tirelessly to uncover the truth behind the fraudulent activities. Camila, seeing Alfonso's distress, stepped up in ways she never expected. Drawing on her years of street smarts and resourcefulness, she began her own investigation, following paper trails and talking to hotel employees who might have information. One evening, as they pored over documents in Alfonso's penthouse, Camila placed a comforting hand on his arm. "We'll figure this out, Alfonso. I promise." He looked up at her, gratitude and something deeper shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Camila. I don't know what I'd do without you." The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Javier, Alfonso's head of security, his face grave. "Sir, there's something you need to see." Javier played them the recording he had made in Gloria's study, revealing her plot to destroy Alfonso's reputation and business. The revelation of his mother's betrayal hit Alfonso like a physical blow. "How could she do this?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Her own son." Camila wrapped her arms around him, offering silent support as he grappled with this new pain. Meanwhile, Daniela was facing challenges of her own. As news of the investigation into her biological father's business spread, she found herself the target of whispers and stares at school. Some of her classmates, jealous of her scholarship, now openly questioned whether she had earned it fairly. One afternoon, overwhelmed by the gossip and confusion, Daniela fled from school and found herself wandering the streets of San Miguel de Allende. Without realizing it, she ended up at the small hotel where Camila worked. Camila, spotting Daniela through the window, rushed out to meet her. "Mija, what's wrong?" And suddenly, faced with her mother's concern, Daniela broke down. All the pain, confusion, and fear of the past weeks came pouring out. Camila held her daughter close, her heart breaking and soaring at the same time at this moment of connection. As mother and daughter talked, neither noticed the figure watching them from across the street. Lucia, torn between her resentment and a growing sense of guilt, snapped a photo of the touching scene before slipping away into the crowd. That evening, As Alfonso prepared for another grueling session with his lawyers, he received a text message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made his blood run cold. It was a photo of Camilla and Daniela embracing outside the hotel, with a message that read, "It would be a shame if something happened to them because of your mistakes, wouldn't it?" Alfonso's hands shook as he dialed Camilla's number. "Where are you?" he demanded as soon as she answered. "Is Daniela with you? You need to get somewhere safe now." Across town, in her opulent hacienda, Gloria Garcia sipped a glass of wine, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Everything was falling into place. Soon she would give Alfonso an ultimatum: sign over control of the company to her, or watch as everything and everyone he loved was destroyed. What Gloria didn't know was that her plan had a fatal flaw. In her obsession with destroying Alfonso, she had overlooked a key player. Maria, the quiet, unassuming woman who had raised Daniela, was about to become the linchpin in a counter-strategy that would turn the tables on Gloria's machinations. As night fell over San Miguel de Allende, the members of this unconventional family found themselves drawn together by the very forces that sought to tear them apart. In Alfonso's penthouse, a council of war was forming. Alfonso, Camila, Daniela, Maria, Luis, and Javier gathered, each bringing their unique strengths and insights to the table. The battle lines were drawn. On one side stood Gloria, driven by greed and a twisted sense of control. On the other, a family bonded not just by blood but by choice and love. The stakes were higher than ever. Not just Alfonso's business empire, but the very future of their newly forged family hung in the balance. As they began to formulate their plan, a sense of determination filled the room. They had been tested by secrets and lies, and had emerged stronger. Now faced with an external threat, they were ready to stand united. The storm was upon them, but together, they just might weather it. The early morning light filtered through the windows of Alfonso's penthouse, illuminating the determined faces of the unlikely alliance gathered around his dining table. They had spent the night strategizing, fueled by coffee and the desperate need to protect their newfound family. Alfonso, his usual polished appearance rumpled from the sleepless night, stood at the head of the table. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Let's go over the plan one more time." Javier, the ever-loyal head of security, nodded and began. "I've compiled all the evidence we have of Doña Gloria's involvement in the financial irregularities. It's not ironclad, but it's enough to cast serious doubt on the current investigation's focus on you, Alfonso." Camilla, her street-smart instincts in full gear, chimed in. "I've reached out to some of my old contacts. They're keeping an ear to the ground for any whispers about Gloria's plans or hired muscle." Maria, who had surprised everyone with her quiet strength and strategic thinking, spoke up. "I've scheduled a meeting with an old friend who works at the prosecutor's office. She owes me a favor, and I think she might be able to give us insight into the investigation that we can use." Luis nodded approvingly at his wife before adding, "I've been going through the hotel's employee records. If Gloria has planted anyone to manipulate the books, we'll find them." Daniela, her young face a mixture of determination and worry, said, "I've been compiling a timeline of events, cross-referencing them with the financial discrepancies. There's a pattern emerging that clearly points to external manipulation." Alfonso felt a surge of pride and gratitude as he looked at the faces around him. This diverse group, brought together by circumstance and bonded by choice, was fighting not just for his reputation, but for their shared future. "Thank you, all of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Now let's set our plan in motion." As the group dispersed to their various tasks, Alfonso pulled Camila aside. "I need you to be extra careful," he said, his eyes intense with worry. "That threat against you and Daniela, I couldn't bear it if anything happened to either of you." Camila placed a comforting hand on his cheek. "We'll be fine, Alfonso. Your mother doesn't know who she's dealing with. I survived on these streets for years. I can handle whatever she throws our way." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world around them faded away. Alfonso leaned in, drawn by a force he couldn't resist, and their lips met in a soft, tender kiss. It was a moment of connection, of shared strength and vulnerability that left them both breathless. Across town, in her lavish hacienda, Gloria Garcia was feeling confident. She sat at her ornate desk, reviewing the latest reports from her moles within the Garcia hotel chain. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Soon Alfonso would be ruined, and she would swoop in to save the company, cementing her control once and for all. A knock at the door interrupted her musings. "Enter!" she called imperiously. Lucia slipped into the room, her face a mask of concern. "Doña Gloria, I think we might have a problem. I've been watching Alfonso's penthouse, and there's been a lot of activity. It looks like he's gathering allies." Gloria waved a dismissive hand. "Let him try. He has no idea of the forces aligned against him. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." But as Lucia left, a seed of doubt had been planted in Gloria's mind. She reached for her phone, dialing a number she rarely used. "It's time to accelerate our plans," she said when the call connected. "I want Alfonso Garcia destroyed by the end of the week." Meanwhile, in a small cafe across town, Maria sat across from her old friend Elena, who worked in the prosecutor's office. "Elena, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," Maria said, her eyes pleading. "We just need to know if there's any evidence that the investigation into Alfonso Garcia is being manipulated." Elena sighed, conflict clear on her face. "Maria, you know I can't discuss ongoing investigations, but—" She paused, lowering her voice. "I can tell you that there are some in the office who find the sudden flood of evidence against Garcia suspicious. Keep digging, that's all I can say." As Maria left the cafe, her mind racing with the implications of Elena's words, she failed to notice the man who had been sitting in the corner, seemingly engrossed in his newspaper. As soon as she was gone, he pulled out his phone. "Doña Gloria, you were right. They're asking questions. What are your orders?" Back at the penthouse, Javier burst into Alfonso's study, his face pale. "Sir, we have a problem. I've just received word that the board of directors is calling an emergency meeting. They're voting on whether to suspend you from your position pending the outcome of the investigation." Alfonso felt the ground shift beneath his feet. This was moving faster than he had anticipated. He looked at Javier, his jaw set with determination. "Get everyone back here now. It's time to take the fight to my mother." As the sun began to set over San Miguel de Allende, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, the various players in this high-stakes drama were converging. Alfonso and his allies, armed with the fragments of truth they had uncovered. Gloria, confident in her web of lies and manipulation. And caught in the middle, the employees of the Garcia hotel chain, the investigators pursuing the case, and the citizens of the town, all watching with bated breath as events unfolded. The next 24 hours would determine not just the fate of the Garcia empire, but the future of a family that had only just begun to heal. As night fell, both sides prepared for a confrontation that would leave no one unscathed. In her room, Daniela sat at her desk, staring at a photo of herself with all four of her parents, Alfonso, Camila, Maria, and Luis. Her heart was heavy with the weight of the coming storm, but also filled with a fierce determination. This was her family, complicated and imperfect as it was, and she would fight with everything she had to protect it. Little did any of them know that fate had one more twist in store, a wild card that would change everything and force each of them to confront truths they had long buried. As the clock ticked towards midnight, the stage was set for a showdown that would shake San Miguel de Allende to its very foundations. The pre-dawn hours in San Miguel de Allende were usually quiet, but on this particular morning, tension crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. In Alfonso's penthouse, last-minute preparations were underway for the confrontation that lay ahead. Alfonso, dressed impeccably in a crisp suit that belied the turmoil within, addressed his allies. "Today we fight not just for my reputation or the company, but for our family. Whatever happens, know that I am grateful for each of you." As they prepared to leave, a commotion at the door caught everyone's attention. Javier burst in, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Sir, you're not going to believe who's here." The group turned as one to see a figure step into the room. Lucia, Camilla's estranged sister and Gloria's reluctant accomplice. Camilla gasped, instinctively stepping in front of Daniela. "Lucia, what are you doing here?" Lucia held up her hands in a gesture of peace, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with remorse. "I've come to help. I can't be part of Gloria's schemes anymore. What she's planning, it's gone too far." Alfonso's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why should we trust you? You've betrayed us before." Lucia reached into her bag slowly, pulling out a USB drive. "Because I have proof. Recordings, documents, everything that shows Gloria's manipulation of the company finances and her plan to frame you, Alfonso." The room erupted in a flurry of activity as Javier plugged in the drive and began examining its contents. After several tense minutes, he looked up, his face grave. "It's all here. Financial records, conversations with corrupt officials, even plans for future sabotage. This is the smoking gun we needed." Alfonso turned to Lucia, his expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering wariness. "Why now? What made you change your mind?" Lucia's gaze fell on Daniela, who had been watching the proceedings with wide eyes. "Because I saw what I was helping to destroy, a family, my family. I couldn't be the one to tear that apart, not again." Camilla, moved by her sister's words, stepped forward and embraced Lucia. Years of hurt and resentment began to melt away in that moment of reconnection. With this unexpected turn of events, the group quickly revised their strategy. Armed with Lucia's evidence, they set out for the emergency board meeting where Gloria was planning to make her final move against Alfonso. Across town, Gloria sat in the boardroom of the Garcia Hotel's flagship property, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. The board members filed in, their faces grave with the weight of the decision before them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gloria began, her voice dripping with false concern, "I know this is a difficult day for all of us, but we must think of the company's future. The evidence against my son is overwhelming. We have no choice but to—" She was cut off as the doors burst open. Alfonso strode in, flanked by Camila, Javier, and to everyone's shock, Lucia. "I'm afraid you'll want to delay that vote," Alfonso said, his voice ringing with authority. "We have some new evidence the board needs to consider." What followed was a whirlwind of revelations. Javier presented the evidence from Lucia's USB drive, laying bare Gloria's years of manipulation and deceit. Board members gasped as they saw the depth of her betrayal, not just of Alfonso, but of the company they had all worked so hard to build. Gloria, her face ashen, attempted to bluster her way through. "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly believe," but her protests were cut short as the doors opened once again. This time it was Maria who entered, accompanied by Elena from the prosecutor's office and several police officers. "Gloria Garcia," Elena said, her voice formal, "you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted blackmail." As the police led a shell-shocked Gloria away, the boardroom erupted into chaos. Alfonso, his head spinning from the sudden turn of events, felt Camilla's hand slip into his. He looked down at her, seeing in her eyes the strength that had carried them both through this ordeal. Outside the hotel, a crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. As Alfonso and his family emerged, a cheer went up from the employees who had always believed in his integrity. Daniela, who had been waiting anxiously with Luis, ran to embrace her parents, all four of them. As Alfonso held his daughter close, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. But even as they celebrated this victory, Alfonso knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The company's reputation had taken a hit, and there was much work to be done to restore trust and stability. Moreover, the family bonds that had been forged in the heat of this crisis would need to be nurtured and strengthened. Lucia's redemption, Daniela's place in this complex family dynamic, and Alfonso and Camilla's rekindled relationship, all of these would require time, patience, and understanding. As the sun reached its zenith over San Miguel de Allende, casting its warm light over the cobblestone streets and colonial architecture, Alfonso looked at the faces of his loved ones. He saw in them not just the reflections of past pain and present joy, but the promise of a future filled with love, understanding, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The storm had passed, but its effects would be felt for years to come. For Alfonso, Camila, Daniela, Maria, Luis, and even Lucia, this was not an ending, but a new beginning. A chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of deceit and misunderstanding. As they walked together through the cheering crowd, Alfonso realized that he had found something far more precious than any business empire. He had found his true home. 1 year had passed since the dramatic events that had shaken the Garcia family and the entire town of San Miguel de Allende. The warm glow of sunset bathed the central plaza in golden light as people gathered for a special celebration. Alfonso stood on a small stage, microphone in hand, looking out at the sea of faces before him. Employees of the Garcia hotel chain, local residents, and his entire extended family were all there, united in a way he could never have imagined a year ago. Friends, family, honored guests, Alfonso began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. 1 year ago we stood at a crossroads. Our company, our relationships, our very understanding of family, all of it was threatened. But today, we gather not to dwell on past troubles, but to celebrate how far we've come and to look forward to the future. He went on to outline the changes that had been made in the wake of Gloria's arrest. The Garcia hotel chain had undergone a complete restructuring, with a focus on ethical business practices and community involvement. Profits were up, employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and their reputation had not just recovered but soared to new heights. But it wasn't just the business that had transformed. Alfonso's gaze fell on his family, seated in the front row. Camila, radiant in a simple sundress, her hand intertwined with his free one. Daniela, now a poised young woman of 18, her eyes shining with pride. Maria and Luis, the steadfast pillars who had raised Daniela with love and who now played an integral role in their expanded family. And Lucia, her face serene, finally at peace with herself and her place in the family. None of this would have been possible, Alfonso continued, his voice thick with emotion, without the love, support and forgiveness of these incredible people. They taught me that true wealth isn't measured in pesos or properties, but in the bonds we forge and the love we share. As Alfonso concluded his speech, announcing a new charitable foundation aimed at supporting underprivileged families in San Miguel de Allende, the crowd erupted in applause. Camila joined him on stage, followed by Daniela, Maria, Luis and Lucia. They stood together, a visual representation of their journey from broken individuals to a strong, united family. The celebration continued long into the night, with music, dancing and laughter filling the plaza. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Alfonso found a quiet moment with Camila away from the festivities. "Can you believe how much has changed in a year?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her. Camila smiled, leaning into his embrace. "It's been quite a journey, but I wouldn't change a thing. It brought us here together." Alfonso nodded, then suddenly looked nervous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Camila, this past year has shown me what truly matters in life. You've been my rock, my conscience, my heart. Will you marry me?" Tears glistened in Camilla's eyes as she nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As Alfonso slipped the ring on her finger, a cheer went up from nearby. They turned to see Daniela grinning from ear to ear, having witnessed the proposal. "Finally!" Daniela exclaimed, rushing to embrace them both. Soon the entire family had gathered, sharing in the joy of the moment. As the night wore on, each member of this unconventional family found moments of reflection and connection. Maria and Luis, watching Daniela laugh with her biological parents, felt a deep sense of gratitude. Their fear of losing her had transformed into an appreciation for the expanded love in her life. Lucia, accepted and forgiven, marveled at the second chance she had been given. She had found purpose in helping run the new charitable foundation, using her street smarts for good. Daniela, surrounded by the love of 4 parents and an aunt who adored her, felt a sense of completeness she had never known she was missing. Her passion for genetics had only grown, fueled by the fascinating complexities of her own family story. As the celebration wound down, Alfonso gathered his family close. "I propose a toast," he said, raising his glass, "to second chances, to the family we choose, and to love that transcends all boundaries." They clinked glasses, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns and the brighter light of shared joy. The path that had brought them together had been twisted and fraught with pain, but it had led them to this moment of unity and hope. As they stood together under the star-filled sky of San Miguel de Allende, Alfonso, Camila, Daniela, Maria, Luis, and Lucia knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. For they had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true happiness comes not from wealth or status, but from the love and support of family, in all its beautiful, complex forms. The story of the Garcia Hernandez family was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. But now, with the foundations of trust, forgiveness, and unconditional love firmly in place, they were ready to write the next chapters together. As the last notes of music faded into the night and the plaza slowly emptied, the family lingered, savoring these precious moments. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and adventures, but for now, they were content to simply be together, grateful for the twists of fate that had brought them to this point. And so, as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, promising a new day and new beginnings, the Garcia Hernandez family walked home together, ready to face whatever the future might hold, hand in hand and heart to heart.